Hello and welcome to Release Date Rewind. My name is Mark J. Parker and I am a film lover, filmmaker, film celebrator. And normally this is an audio podcast wherever you get your podcasts on your favorite apps. But thanks to Portland Media Center, you are about to watch the video component of this show where I celebrate movie anniversaries with my friends. Each month, I usually talk about two different movies that I love with different friends, and we talk about the making of the movies, trivia, any fun memories associated with them. So I hope you enjoy, because now it's time to rewind.
The entire community starts attributing the daily horrors of their lives to a mythical figure.
The legend first appeared in 1890. He was attacked, mutilated, and burned to death. Poor Candyman.
Clive Barker produced this. He didn't direct it, but it is based on his short story, The Forbidden. I actually have never read any Clive Barker stories. Have you, Gaius? No?
Me, no, I never have. And it's interesting, too. Like, I never read, I think Hellraiser is based on like his novella, the Hellbound Heart. I never read that either. Like, yeah, no. And you would think, because these movies are so a part of like, us. I would like kind of like go back and I've never read The Forbidden or any of his stuff.
Yeah,
I heard his stuff's really good from like people that follow it. Like
I bet it's good, but I'm too scared.
He's a particular kind of band of like scary, I think.
Yeah, I feel like,
like you have to
have a strong
really
stomach to read through those pages. Yeah, I totally hear you. Yeah. So he had written that, and then I thought this was interesting because Clive Barker is British. The Forbidden is all about the UK. It's set in Liverpool, which is where Clive Barker is from. And how interesting. Bernard Rose is the writer and director of this film, Candyman. He is also British. Right. So it's interesting because this movie feels so American. It's set in Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, we are at Cabrini Green, the projects, a public housing community in Chicago. It's all about kind of those typical American urban legends. Obviously, not only Candyman, but even like The Babysitter. They talk about, what do they talk about in the class? The alligators in the sewer. You know, all of these kind of classic American stories. So it's really so interesting that we had a British director. But so he had directed music videos, and he made a few films that got accolades like Paper House, and I think a Kiefer Sutherland movie that I've never heard of, Chicago Joe and the Showgirl. But he wanted to take Clive Barker's Liverpool story and switch it up and set it in Chicago in the projects where there are, you know, race inequality, race relations, race issues, which is so bold and interesting and not unlike the short story. I did read that the short story was about class issues in Liverpool, but Clive Barker must have been like, whoa, this is a very different version. And I assume that Candyman was not going to be black. He would not be an African American in that story. Maybe, I don't know.
I think Tony Todd's talked about that. I think that it wasn't that wasn't the plan. I guess like for a lot of like, it's interesting too. Like what you brought up about Bernard Rose. You didn't know that like he's a British man and like all this stuff. Like it goes to show you that like you don't have to necessarily like be from a certain area and like all that stuff to kind of get like I think like everything about his filmmaking in this, like he and the writing and all that, like he gets it. Like he really nailed, and like for whatever reason the changes were made to like set it in Chicago. I think that was probably the best creative decision they made, because I think that kind of like it really sets the tone for their overall story. But then there's like you said, there are all like issues with race inequality and all that too. Like I think having in that area and then dealing with like what they're dealing with in it, and then also having like Candyman be African American in the story, like all that kind of like ended up working out for the best, I think, like thematically for the story, I think. Like but like you would have never guessed like like you would have like, who directed this?
Right. You would think, like it's someone totally different, but this guy did his research, and I did read he had to have meetings with the NAACP, and I know Virginia Madsen has stated she said she was nervous during filming, and even close to the release was nervous about how the public and critics would receive this film. I think she's
Yeah.
even quoted saying, "I don't think Spike Lee will like this film," because of course Spike Lee was
Yeah, you
hugely
know,
and still is, but was hugely popular
yeah.
at this time and had done Do the Right Thing and all that. So I thought that was kind of a funny quote. But I mean, well, what do you think, Gay? Since we're talking about it, like, I mean, we were kids. I was, I think, only 5 when this came out, so that's why I saw it. I just happened to catch this one later in life. But was there ever a moment in your mind that you thought it could be offensive or like not a good move to have an African American slasher? Because that never dawned on me from my point of view. You know.
It never dawned on me either. But I remember like I've seen like different, uh, not necessarily documentaries about Candyman, but where they talk about certain scenes or moments from it. And
Mm,
um, one of the reasons, like Tony Todd has talked about like, and I didn't really get this. You know, if you're an African American actor and you're playing like the killer in the movie, there's certain implications there that I didn't really get like when I was a
mhm.
kid, where it's just like usually you want to play the hero, like you want to be identify as like you know
Yeah.
something else. So I didn't really like get that when I was younger seeing it.
Hmm.
It wasn't until much later and then hearing people talk about it and how much of a big deal it ended up turning out to be.
Mm.
Because of course, like and I think we still go through this now where they kind of feel like if your movie has like the marketing is built around like having like a black lead and all that stuff, like how can it sell as well like to everyone
Right.
else?
Yep.
And I think that was also something they spoke about where it's like, oh, like how can this make money? Can this do that?
Hmm.
Um, but I what he has talked about is how like he basically wanted to kind of change perceptions of like what people might see if you had like an African American lead in a slasher movie.
Hmm.
And he also liked that he just wasn't a killer though. There was depth there. There was a lot of nuance to that character,
Oh
even though
yeah.
like even though you don't really get it until like you hear like the whole story and everything. Like there was more to him than just like showing up after you say his name 5 times, killing people. There was like a much deeper like
Yeah.
thing there, and that's what Tony Todd said he's appreciated about it, and what he said that other people when they see it have appreciated about it, that there was just a lot more going on there than just having him be like some supernatural like serial
Yeah.
killer. Like
Yeah.
in a lot of ways you end up like feeling bad. I mean,
Hmm. Oh
for
yeah.
him. I mean, there's like the circumstances are pretty tragic, but like it's uh yeah, I mean, I think that like if you're gonna have something like this and if you're gonna tell a story like this, there needs to be some nuance here. There needs to be more than just like you know
Yeah.
serial killer of the week. And I think that's what they did really well, and I think that's why he wanted to play it, and I think that's why he's kind of happy to have that mantle now. It's like being the African American lead of like something like this means more because
Right.
it's just a lot more than like what could have been, like he like they
Hmm.
talked about how like in certain projects, you have people playing like thugs or like stuff like that. He's like, you don't want to be typecast that way. And he was like, it was so great that he said they saw something different in him and they're like, hey, they're gonna like let you do this, and like allowed him to like bring like something special to it. And like I think that in the long run is why that role in that movie for a lot of people. Like, I mean, I've talked to. It was interesting when I did like the interviews for the new one, like how important this original movie, is to the African American community, especially to people who love horror movies.
Hmm.
There's not a lot there. We don't really have a lot of there's that whole like running stereotype like when we're in one of these like we die first, that kind of
Right.
thing. There's like that. There's
Yep.
that kind of thing that goes, and like so this movie for a lot of African Americans is really just important because it's so different from what they were normally getting and like how they were kind of perceived in like, these kind of movies.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's why I think it's a lot more important now. I mean, of course, I wish I would have realized this when I was a child. I mean, you're watching it as a kid, you're like, oh, this is just scary.
Oh
But
yeah.
like, but then you get older and you like kind of like pay attention. Like I said, I mean, I told you some of my mom likes this movie a
Right.
lot, and it's because it like has so much more to say than this, just being a scary
Yeah.
movie.
Oh
And
yeah.
like, yeah,
Like when we find out about Candyman's backstory, it's kind of in the last act. It's towards the end, and the way and we feel for him because oh my God, it was brutal how he's killed. Right? He falls in love with
yeah,
this this white woman who now okay, one thing I just still need clarity on. So did he fall in love with like, because he says to Helen, it's always been you, and she sees like a painting
And
of a face that looks like her. So is it like the like is she the reincarnated version
so,
of
so
the original
I've
woman?
I've always wondered that too, and I don't
Yeah.
know if it's like, and I wonder if it's one of those things where it's like open to interpretation, like if it's just
Yeah.
like,
Or like an old
yeah,
ancestor from,
that's her,
you
like
know,
if she's somehow like related to her in some way,
right.
and like
Yeah.
like I've always wondered that too, and I don't know for sure,
Yeah.
but
I
I mean
guess
I guess
they leave it open and,
yeah,
you can sort of interpret it, like you said, however you want. But yeah, so she sees this similar face to hers on the wall. And so that's the woman that he's fallen in love with. He got her
okay,
pregnant, right? And then her
yep,
father is, it sounds like a landowner, a slave owner or something,
yeah,
a
yeah,
wealthy guy who loses it and does not want, obviously, her, his daughter having the baby of this African American man. And
right,
I mean, just sends this group of hooligans to cut off his hand, and then coat his naked body in honey, which is where all the bees come in. These
honey,
bees, oh
it's
my
come from.
gosh, right? If you didn't think the
I might
bloody
definitely
hook
afraid of
was
bees, by the
scary,
way.
the bees, oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, the second
I'm definitely
shot of
afraid
the
of
whole
bees.
movie is the swarm of bees in the city of Chicago,
Yeah,
right? Whoa,
yeah.
yeah, pretty impressive for
It's like you
sure.
already got me. You already got me. You already got me with that.
Oh,
I'm so
oh
afraid of
yeah,
bees. So like, so
yeah,
there's certain points in this movie where I'm just like,
oh
and to
totally.
know that Tony Todd actually worked so closely, very closely,
Oh my gosh,
with
what did
with actual bees, I was like,
he was paid an extra $1,000 per bee sting. Is that right? Did you read that
per
too?
piece,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
per
my
piece, yeah.
gosh. Oh
Oh,
yeah. I mean,
anything
they're
for
in
the
his
art.
mouth. They're all over his face. And
In his
I read
mouth,
that,
yeah.
right. I read that he had to wear a like a mouthpiece to try to prevent any bee stings inside the mouth. But then I also read that Virginia Madsen
Could not pay me
was
enough.
allergic. So there she
Or
is
shit.
with bees all over her face. Bees are all over him. I mean, there's a lot of amazing imagery here, which really, I mean, I'm actually surprised Bernard Rose didn't end up doing more horror films or just more film or like more big movies, because
Yeah,
this seems to be like his biggest one, right? Like,
yeah,
I'm just
yeah. I think
surprised
so.
he
And like,
didn't
and it
have
was
a
pretty
flourishing
well
career after
received
this.
too.
Oh,
Yeah, it was
totally.
pretty well
Yeah.
received too, and like, yeah, it's and like, I think most people would consider it a classic now. Like,
Oh,
it
definitely,
is
right?
it is kind of crazy that like he didn't kind of build on that momentum a bit.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about too, because like I
Hmm.
don't know if it's just a product of when it came out, but like I think, and you can probably attest this to the horror fan. Like, there's a
Hmm.
lot of like pre-Scream. A lot of people are like, oh, like
Hmm.
the '90s wasn't that good for horror. Like, and like I
Right.
think kind of Candyman gets like forgotten a little bit, where it's like
Yeah.
they're like, oh, the '90s was like so bad for horror until Scream came out, but it's like, hey, like this movie
Yeah.
was chilling right here in 1992.
That's a
And
good,
like,
yeah,
you know,
that's a really good
you
point.
get,
You're right. We've heard
yeah,
multiple times from different outlets that, yeah, the horror was kind of getting boring, stale, silly because of all those repetitive sequels in the 80s, right? And all the
yeah,
over
the
the
like
top
Nightmare on Elm
stuff.
Street, and yeah,
And then you
Halloween.
never
Yeah,
know,
they were all being
maybe,
sequelized.
absolutely, yeah, it's overkill, huh? And
Yeah,
then you never know, maybe this is just my thought. I didn't read this or anything, but maybe seeing a black slasher in the trailer, maybe that turned some people off, no matter what
off,
your race was, because we had like Blackula in the 70s, those exploitation
right?
movies that were kind of goofy. I'm
Yeah,
so maybe people were just kind of like, oh, now we're like doing that again. So yeah, but I
yeah,
think this movie definitely, like many movies in the 90s, gained popularity in probably rentals, home video. I mean, that, and how
yeah,
spooky to see this movie at home with your bathroom mirror not that far away, right?
yeah. No
So,
way. Yeah, yeah,
and obviously it was successful enough to spawn, a total of 3 sequels, 4 movies
yeah.
total with the latest one. So I mean, it had some success, maybe not financially, and maybe that's why Bernard Rose wasn't offered other things, because maybe it wasn't the number one movie like they were hoping, like other
Right.
movies were.
Like
But
I think it did well relative to its budget, but
yeah,
it didn't really like break out in like
hmm,
a huge way.
yeah. But
Yeah,
I mean,
I wonder when you make something like that, like if you're like at the time it's like, oh well, I mean, I guess, and then you have to like, then you get like all this like affirmation like years later, and it's like, oh,
right.
like we love that movie, and you're like, oh well, wish you guys were talking about this in
Yeah, you're like,
1982.
okay, I guess better late than never, but oh, that would have
Yeah,
been really helpful back
yeah.
then,
I
right?
always wonder if like people like it's so funny because I follow the guy who directed Urban Legend on Twitter,
Oh yeah.
and he recently I forgot that he directed Valentine, and he
Oh,
like
fun.
he shouted that movie out, and then I'm reading like it was like maybe 80 plus comments of everyone talking about how much they love Valentine. I was like, man, where were you guys at?
I
And
know,
like
right?
whatever year that came out, I like because like no one
Yeah,
was
like
singing its
2001,
no
I
one was
think.
one yeah no one was singing its praises in
Right.
2001. It took a while to get some of my friends to even rewatch this one. Like when the new one
Mm,
was coming out, I was like, yeah, you should.
hmm.
I had friends that never seen it, that seen
Oh
Candyman at
yeah.
all, and they're
Right.
like, oh, I really want to see the remake. I was like, well, you never really seen the original, and then they're like,
Yeah.
I think some of them were like all worried that it's gonna be dated and that it wouldn't like hold up well, and I was
Nah,
like,
I
no,
mean,
it's.
come
And I
on.
finally showed it to one friend that like was like, dude, it's like because he saw the reboot first, and then
Oh,
was like, dude, this
okay.
is like so. He was like, this is so much better than like
Yeah.
that new one. I mean, not that I did not like the new one. I was,
I thought it was
it's
good.
just
Did you not love it?
I thought it did some really, also did some things well, like really
Yeah.
well, and then there were other things that kind of like
Yeah.
fell
The
short a
only
little bit, but like,
gripe I have with it, from what I remember, I've only seen it once. I watched it at home last year. My only gripe was I just feel like the ending, we got there like super fast all of a sudden, and like there's the
yeah, yeah,
twist, and that was another moment where I was like, did I fast forward? Like, did I skip like a whole 10 minutes? Because whoa,
it
this
cut a
twist
scene.
is coming out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, whoa, okay, we're wrapping up, But I thought it was scary. I thought it was gross in a good way. I
thought
thought
the
it was
acting was great
clever.
too.
The acting was
I thought the acting
perfect.
was really good.
I
Really
know
good.
some people, and it's funny because I, on my previous podcast, add this to your list, we had interviewed Mark Patton for the Scream Queen documentary, and which was all about A
Oh,
Nightmare on Elm
nice. That's
Street
cool.
2. And it's
Yeah,
funny
yeah.
because he and the directors of that documentary, they had said the new Candyman is like Freddy's Revenge, is Nightmare on Elm Street 2, where a young man, a boy, is being kind of turned into Freddy. So yeah,
Yeah.
so the new Candyman, I guess we can call it Candyman 4 or Candyman 2, I don't know, but Candyman 2021. Yeah, they sort of took a little bit of that Freddy 2 element, but I thought it was
Yeah.
pretty great. I liked it, and I thought it was clever that they took side characters from the original Candyman, right? They took Anne Marie,
Yep.
played by Vanessa Williams, and her baby
Williams.
Anthony, who is an important role, this baby who's gone missing. I mean, that whole scene when Helen wakes
Missing,
up and
right?
she's covered in blood and the dog's head. Oh my gosh, wow. And I've talked
Yeah,
about
yeah, yeah.
other movies about severed dog heads. I don't know what's going on, filmmaker. We talked about
It's a
Fear on
theme.
this
It's a running
podcast,
theme.
where the dog's head is just plopped right through the doggy door. Oh my God, it's a sick theme, but it's effective. But yeah, I
Yeah,
did
yeah.
like how the sequel did bring back the baby Anthony as this adult who is being haunted by Candyman. I thought that was pretty cool. It wasn't just
So I thought that
some
stuff was
new
good too. I thought that was
stranger, I thought I
yeah. I
liked the
thought it was good to
connection.
have like, and because that made what like Jordan Peele said about it make a lot more sense. Where he said this is more like a spiritual sequel to
Yeah,
Candyman, where it's like
yeah,
where like you're taking those kind of like that one thing connects them, and I thought that was really interesting that they did that instead of just kind of just like,
yep,
oh, let's reboot it and have it have no connection to that whatsoever. I
right,
thought that was like, I thought
yeah,
that was a really smart move on their part. And it
yeah.
was one of those things too when you're watching, you're just like, oh, okay.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
You're like,
you're
oh, I see
like, all
what you
right.
did there. It's not just some
Yeah,
random guy who like lives in the neighborhood or lives in Chicago. There actually is a connection, and I do love Vanessa Williams's return in the sequel.
yeah.
I love when she's like, "Shh,
Eh,
no, don't,"
dude,
like,
one of the best, like I got 15 minutes with her,
yeah.
and she's lovely
She's
and she's
also
amazing.
gorgeous.
My
Wow, like,
my
love
mom my
her.
mom, yeah, she is. And she still looks great. Like she hasn't aged
Yeah,
like at all.
yeah.
And my mom like loves her. And I was like, can you please just like give my mom a shout out? Because like she used to watch like Soul Food on like Showtime, and she was on that
Oh
show. And
yeah.
she's like, what's your mom's name? So I was like, Regina. She's like, tell Regina I said hi. I was like, what?
Oh,
This is
that's
awesome.
so sweet. Now, I
But it
wonder
was
if
cool too
she's
because she
ever
has like
had issues with her name, because obviously we know there's the other, possibly more famous Vanessa Williams.
famous.
So it is interesting that it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, you might, that gets confusing, but you're
Well,
both great.
does she go by like Vanessa E. Williams? Is that like how
I
she
think
distinguishes?
in some projects she's credited as that, but in others she's not. So Yeah, and like
Yeah.
in this original Candyman, it was just Vanessa Williams in the credits. So
Everyone knows he isn't real.
That's modern oral folklore.
Everyone. Except Helen Lyle.
Bernadette.
It ain't safe around here.
I don't scare too easy.
Wanna know about Ruthie Jean? They ain't never gonna catch him.
Who?
Candyman.
let's talk about like just your memorable scenes from this movie, because there are so many, like I said, visceral scenes, like when Helen is in the bathroom and the little boy's kind of keeping watch, and then Candyman, in quotes, you know, a different guy with a hook beats her. And I mean, they really make Cabrini Green, this housing,
well, it's
so
its
scary.
it's its own character. I think
Yes.
I think that the whole atmosphere of the movie like becomes its own character
Yep.
in this, and and that's like also another cool thing about it just being someone like Bernard Hughes that did this, or Bernard Rose, sorry, that did this. It's just like, you know, usually they would tell you that you need to understand the neighborhood, you need to get it, and like
Yep.
somehow, some way, like he got it, and
Yeah.
you know, like, and it really comes through on screen. I was trying to think of like a favorite moment, and like the one that still stands out because I still remember it as a child just being scary, is when Helen first sees Candyman in the parking garage, and like it's that shot of him like far away.
Yes, and
then,
she
like,
said,
and then
"Who
it's,
is
like,
that?"
I said,
Right?
yeah, and his voice, like, I mean, like, it just like I remember as a kid how much that, and this is like basically in daylight, so
Yeah.
it's a scary moment, because it's just weird how the way he's standing there,
Yes,
like
he's
head
looking
kind of
up.
tilted back and just like
Yeah.
up, yeah, like it's just like, yeah, and then he gets closer and closer to her, and then and like his,
Yes.
I don't know what he does with his eyes, like the way he like is looking deep into her.
Who is that?
I came for you.
Do I know you?
That whole scene is like
Oh,
still creeps me out.
it's so
And,
good.
like,
I'm
that- it's
glad
just,
you brought that
yeah.
up.
I get
Yeah,
like
I'm
goosebumps. Like it's
Oh yeah. I
it's
mean,
so
parking
good.
garage scenes
It's
in
so
horror
good.
films are usually hit or miss. I always like them because parking garages can totally be scary.
Yeah.
But you know, we had like Cursed and we had Scream 4 parking garage scenes that were okay. But like
Scream
this, you know, she's on a high because her friend, who I love, played by Cassie Lemons, Bernadette, her friend and her partner in this. I mean, also, didn't this movie just totally want to make you go to grad school and study urban legends? I'm like, oh my
Yeah,
god,
the urban
I want to
legends.
do that.
I was like, you could do that,
Right? I know.
yeah.
And
my
going
thing was,
back
like,
to the
when
movie
when I was
Urban
going to
Legend,
school,
this makes
yeah.
such a great like double feature with that, not only because of just urban legends, but how they're both set like at college and everything. So
Yeah.
it's funny how you brought up the director.
like I'm like thinking back, like I was like, when I was in school, was there like an urban
Right?
legend folklore class? Like, and
Right?
how did I miss it?
I know. I'm like, you guys make this look so fun, smoking your cigarettes and like interviewing students and like looking at the microfiche, which I mean, in these old scary movies, you always have to have those microfiche articles,
yeah, you do,
always,
yeah.
right? But
That definitely dates it for real.
Yeah. But you know, I'm okay with it. It dates it, but I think that's
Yeah.
so like it's just such a part of horror for so long, is like looking at the library
Yeah.
through the old, you know, it's just I love
You
it.
find like all the town's mysteries are
Yes. Oh, totally.
right there.
But yeah, that's
that's
a
great.
great scene for sure. The parking lot, you know, and I believe that's one of the moments when Virginia Madsen really was hypnotized on set, which seems like such a risk. But did you
Yeah, I
read
know,
that?
yeah.
I guess Bernard
Yeah,
Rose really did
she
have
did.
like a hypnotist on there, and you can see she's not blinking. Her eyes are getting red and tearing up, and she
Yeah.
really does look like she's not all there, which is amazing and very. I mean, it's a good choice. It really works to show
It
how
does
she
work,
is,
yeah.
you know, under his power, under his spell.
Yeah.
But whoa, yeah, that's good. What else? I also just love the apartment stuff. Like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, when she's all alone in the apartment and she's looking in the medicine cabinet and she's just thinking, and then the hook comes out, and then he's all of a sudden in the hallway, and then he's in the kitchen, and that's when poor Bernadette gets killed. You know, every time I watch this, it's been maybe 4 times at least now, I always forget how Candyman keeps setting Helen up to be the
Yeah.
killer. And it's so frustrating
yeah.
because it's like, we know, no, she's not doing this. But even when Trevor, when her shady husband comes in, she's holding the bloody knife. She's always
Yep.
Oh my gosh, it's so stressful.
It's just
you
like
know?
it's like his twisted version of like I love
Yes.
you.
Yes, you're right,
Like,
because it's this twisted romance, like he loved the old version of her back 100 years ago or
it's like
whatever.
he's doing whatever he needs to do to keep her, like, and whatever he
Yes.
needs to do, like it's like phasing out all these like
Yes.
people that he perceives are like
Yeah,
maybe getting in the way of like him having her.
totally.
That's what makes it so twisted. I mean, like that, and that's what makes that character so interesting too, because you feel bad for him,
Yeah.
but you also know that like what he's doing is so steeped in vengeance, which is why this thing hasn't really like died, right? Like that
Right.
vengeance has like carried on for like years and years and years, and that's why it's so powerful. Um,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where yeah, you feel bad because like what he went through was really tragic, but it's like now you're kind of doing the things that like like basically were done to you, and like
Yeah.
and like and that and all in the name of like well, I guess love. I mean, for her
Right.
in his
Yeah.
own way. That's another thing that makes it so interesting. Like, there's so many layers to like
Yeah.
what's going on in it, and yeah, it's pretty cool.
Totally. And then at the end, and we can get into spoilers. It's okay. Everyone, hopefully by now, either you've seen it or
I hope
you're
you've
cool
seen
with
it,
right? But then at the end, I mean that twisted big bonfire, how they see her hook and they think that's Candyman, he's here, and the whole baby, and then she gets all burned up, and then she is Candyman at the end, and Trevor gets it, that cheating husband. But yeah, I would say my favorite deaths in this movie, if we had to pick like the craziest deaths, I do love Travis's death because it's just, I remember like when I first saw this movie in full, I didn't even expect her to be the killer at the end. Like, whoa, that was just such a great twist. So that, and I do love, it's so like shocking and gross, and it's just such a shock when she's in the doctor's office at the hospital, and she looks in the mirror and she says Candyman 5 times to prove it to this doctor. And, a second or two goes by. It's very normal. And then you just hear, again, those
it's
gross
like
sound
visceral,
effects.
dude. It's like
Yes.
it's like
And Candyman's right there behind him. And wow, it's awesome.
he
And
also
then-
looks very creepy in that scene
Yes.
too. It's like
Yes.
it's like ugh.
Yes, the camera's low from her point of view,
Oh,
and he's
yeah.
looking angry.
Yeah.
And then those
Angry,
amazing,
yeah.
there's not too many moments, but I just have to call out the amazing practical effects of having him hanging. Like in that same scene, he goes out the window, back out the window, he breaks through it,
Right,
and like,
window.
ropes are pulling him out, which is so like kind of disturbing, and what a visual, right? And same thing earlier when she's in the hospital tied to the bed, he's floating above her and then floats slowly down under the bed. Like some really amazing visuals that I feel like this movie doesn't always get enough credit for,
The credit for also I wanted to point out too, what I also don't think it gets enough credit for, the score. I think it's Philip Glass score is really, really good. So especially like I mean, like it's like I don't know why it's not talked about more in like the pantheon of like good horror movie scores. But it's really good.
Oh
like,
yeah,
really, really good.
Very haunting.
Really sets the tone. Yeah,
it feels both like of that time, but also kind of like old, which would make sense with the old legend and the whole slavery aspect. It feels like kind of like just like of another era,
Right.
But great score. A lot. I mean, the sound and the camera work and also just the production design. How that iconic image of her going through not only the hole behind the mirror, that's amazing, but then the hole where it's like the man's face. I guess it's
face.
Candyman, or like
man's face,
wow, amazing stuff.
Candyman, you don't have to believe. Just beware.
Thanks so much for watching. Next time, there's going to be a new movie that we'll talk about, so stay tuned. And please follow Release Date Rewind on Instagram for updates. Bye.